Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today lived in old and haunted houses when she was growing up, which sparked a lifelong interest in both history and storytelling. She earned degrees in history-related fields and worked as a historian for many years. Her fiction writing is heavily influenced by the past, which she believes is never really dead and buried. Fueled by black coffee and a possible sprinkling of Celtic fairy dust, she tends to find inspiration in odd places and sometimes while kneading bread dough. The author resides in Maryland with her husband, 3 kids, barn cat, and the occasional backyard hen, who put up with her mad scribbling at inconvenient hours. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Mary Kendall.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Julia, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you this morning.
Mary, our opening question is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Julia, I'm going to flip the script on that question and say, is 50 years really that long? I like the expression of, I'm paraphrasing, it's something to the effect of the first 40 years, we're getting the text down. The next 40 after that is the commentary. So if you look at it that way, 50 is just getting us started with our effort to digest and process and get our writing out there, I think.
Well, I agree. And I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they're still turning out beautiful work. So I think we can write forever.
Yep.
Once you wrote your first book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I first started out after my first book with the path of finding an agent and querying. Now, a couple books later, I found myself not having any luck. So I established a rule for myself with the book that I do have now published, The Spinster's Fortune, 100 queries and or a year. And then I would put it aside and start the next project. So that actually happened with The Spinster's Fortune, the book we're talking about today. And in fact, I was already on my next project and querying it. And I was just doing onesie twosies with The Spinster's Fortune and kind of keeping my hand in it. At that point, I had moved on to small presses. And that's how it was picked up. It was picked up by a small press during that stage.
Well, I'm just so happy we have so many options these days.
Definitely.
What was your inspiration for your first book?
It's funny. I now realize after some time's gone by and the book's been out almost a year and a half, that my inspiration was my grandfather. And let me say a bit about that and explain that. I am a historian by training, and I've done genealogy for years. So I was doing some genealogy on my grandfather. He passed about 9 years before I was born, so I never knew him, but he was a lawyer in DC. And because of that, he was showing up in old newspaper articles. So I found a photograph of him in an article, and then I saw the story with that. And that was the real life story that The Spinster's Fortune is based on. So in time, I realized my grandfather led me to this story. He was my inspiration.
I love that. What does the title mean?
The title has a double meaning. It's a double entendre. So if I were to tell you what it means, it would give away the story. And if you have any listeners today that might plan on reading it, I wouldn't want to do that. My hope is by the end of the novel that the reader understands what the title means. That's my intention.
Well, how did you determine the plot for this book?
The plot is based on the research of the real life story, which I immediately dived into after finding out about it. Once I had read about this story, I was just so fascinated by it, and I needed to know the why. Why did this happen? I was so curious. So for the plot, I used the framework of the actual real life event. And then, of course, I needed to use my imagination and my fictional chops to spin it out and come out with what I imagined the whys to be.
Well, I know your grandfather inspired this story. Did real people inspire any of your characters?
Yes, the real life character of Blanche Magruder was the became one of my main protagonists. So I used her name and the circumstances of her real life. Now, of course, I don't know what she truly was like. So from that point, I had to create what I envisioned her to be. So she's really the core of the story. So yes, that she inspired the story.
Well, I love that about historical fiction because you can take a real life event and turn it any way you want to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell us more about your publishing journey, challenges, things that worked for you or didn't work. Post publication, what have you been doing as far as publicity?
I realized that at first when I started out, I thought, oh, this is a point A to point B kind of journey. I soon found out that wasn't the case for me. It was going to be zigzaggy, I like to call it. And that's okay. So, as we've talked about, it was a long process to get this book out there. And I ended up with a small press, which has been fantastic and a fabulous experience. Challenges along the way, as this was my debut novel, I had to really learn just from the ground up what to do with the novel, how to promote it, how to market. And there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of learning in that. Since the publication, and even during the process of publication, I keep on writing. That's what I do. I'll always write. And I went ahead after some time had gone by, and this was published, and worked on getting my second novel picked up. And I was successful in that. And I'm very happy to say that that will be published in November. That's called Campbell's Boy. And it was picked up by another small press, Moonshine Cove Publishing. And that's slated to be published in November, this November.
Well, you and I are on kind of the same timeline. I published one book a year ago and have a second one dropping in November as well. Tell us more about your editing process that you chose.
For the editing of The Spinster's Fortune, the small press I was with, of course, I self-edited for years, and it went through the revisions and all the things we have to do. When I finally got it to the small press, they had 3 rounds of editing, and that was a really great experience for me because I had never been through anything like that. So they got me in shape with that, and that's how that ended up.
Well, why don't you give us a brief synopsis of the book?
Okay. The Spinster's Fortune is a historical mystery, and it's set in the neighborhood of Georgetown in DC, and it takes place in the 1920s. As we've discussed, it's based on a real life story about a lady named Blanche Magruder, who has found herself somehow in the poorhouse in an institution. Her abandoned house in the neighborhood of Georgetown is a crumbling ruins. Along the way, looters have come out with monies and treasures from the house, and authorities have been alerted to this fact. So once they're involved, they track down the next of kin, who in the story is Margaret, an estranged niece. Margaret gets involved to try to help her aunt and try to sort out these monies. And in the process, she discovers family secrets long buried. And it becomes a journey for both women, Blanche and Margaret, to deal with their pasts and some secrets by the end of the novel.
Well, that sounds intriguing.
I hope so.
Why don't you read from your book for us so that we can hear your tone and voice?
Okay, I'm going to read a passage from chapter 3, which takes place 18 months earlier. Blanche stirred under the mountain of blankets and felt the cold chill seep in where the blankets had moved a little. Nights like these, she ached for a roaring fire, one more roaring fire in the hearth like they used to have when she was growing up. Her mind often played back over the images of when the house was filled with the entire family, both of her parents, her one brother, and her 3 sisters. Now it was just down to her. One by one, they had crossed the great divide, but it did no good to dwell on that. Time for her to get to work. The sun had set, and there was just a little streetlight coming through the shuttered windows in her drawing room. She moved into a seated position, feeling and hearing the cracks in her old bones. She placed a tentative foot out of the blankets and, using her arm, pulled herself up to standing. Walking across the room, her reflection glimmered in the hall mirror with the scant light available. She peered at it. Standing at a petite 5'2" she still had the alabaster skin that had been the envy of all the debutantes at her coming out ball. She kept her hair in the same fashion, pulled around her heart-shaped face to gather in a loose chignon at the nape of her neck. Once shiny and deeply blonde, it now lay like a matte finish on her head in white. She smiled into the reflection, a practice smile, and one that had served her so well throughout the years. She sometimes wondered where her youth had vanished to. Inside, she didn't feel like the aged lady who looked back at her in the cracked hall mirror. She felt the same inside. Still that debutante waiting for the one dance that would change it all, a dance that had never happened. She had remained in her father's house on 35th Street all these years.
It's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know people ask us this all the time, and sometimes I hesitate about this question, but do you know how long on average it takes you to write a book?
I do. On average, it takes me about a year to spill that messy, rough draft out. Now, after that point, it can range from 6 months, 9 months, or another year to really whip it into shape and get it to a point where I feel like it's ready to see the world.
And that's pretty fast. A lot of people take a lot longer than that, Mary.
Yep, but you know what? Some people, they go a lot shorter than that. Can really whip them out. Yeah.
I'm always interested in knowing what you edited out of the book. What didn't make the cut?
Okay, so The Spinster's Fortune is written with dual points of view, Margaret and Blanche, for the first half of the book. I don't know why I did that. That was so challenging. And I don't know why I took that on, but I did. Once I did it, though, it involved so much to edit that to a point where it flowed and it was going to work as a narrative. So that is where my roughest cuts were, to try to really get those dual points of view to mesh and to flow and to come together.
Well, writing historical fiction, do you complete research before you begin writing or as you go along?
I definitely complete the bulk of the research before I start writing. I accumulate all the materials I can, and then I sift through them. And if I feel like I have enough and I'm inspired, then I'll get going. Now, that's not to say along the way, I won't continue to research it and add in if I find other things that are going to fit. That's my process.
Is historical fiction the genre that you prefer to read yourself?
It is, although I have to say my sort of secret reads are the psychological thrillers. Those are the one. If I want just like movie popcorn, that's what I'll pick up and read, and I gobble them up. So yeah, that's my guilty pleasure, I guess we could say. But yes, I read a lot of historical fiction, and of course enjoy it and benefit from it. Really.
I have gotten sucked into psychological thrillers myself. I don't know if what's happening around the country, but everybody's so into, crime stories and psychological thrillers. I don't know what that says about us, but I
Yeah,
certainly listen. I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
I do
Uh,
too.
and so I like to listen to those. They really keep you on the edge of your seat.
They do, and maybe that's it, that immediacy of just falling into the story and just staying there and not really maybe having to. Historical fiction can sometimes be heavier. You need to digest and really think about some of the facts and the figures and everything you're reading. Maybe that's the difference.
And I think when I read books in print, I tend to start putting my editor hat on. And I think when I listen to audiobooks, I can just be in the moment. I don't have to look at the words on the page. So it's very strange how I do that. Do,
Uh-huh.
have you found yourself editing when you read for pleasure now that you're a writer?
I do. And you know what I especially do is well, I think I'm now at the point though where I find the typos quicker if I'm reading a print book, which, it's not something I should be looking for at all, right? There's always going to be typos. We know that. You can read something thousands of times and you're still going to find a typo, and that's just the way it is. But yeah, I've always been I like to say I'm a reader before I'm a writer. So I always read for pleasure, always.
Well, it's so frustrating. I just um, printed my advanced reader copies for my second novel. And even after five editors, I still found typos. So, I don't think, we ever finish editing our own work. And so
No,
I can find your typos very easily, but I can't find my own since I've been in my work for so long.
exactly. Because we get so close to it. We get so close to it. Although, I did find when I was in the deep edits of The Spinster's Fortune, this was bizarre. I was working with it so closely, I started dreaming about it, and something would come to me in the night, and I'd wake up the next morning and be like, I have to fix that. I was really so close to it that happened. It's kind of amazing.
I've heard so many authors say that they dream
Yeah.
about their books or they come up with plot
You're
holes
in the
that they
middle of
can
the night, you're
fix.
freaking out like,
Yes,
oh no.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Somebody's
that
looking out for us, maybe.
that shows how invested we are in our work.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think was the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
I was really fortunate in that a couple months after The Spinster's Fortune came out, as a fluke, I applied for what's called a BookBub featured deal. And in the writing world, that's sort of the holy grail of promo and marketing. And I didn't think I had a chance at all because I had read all these stories about writers that try and try for years and years and years and years, and they never get one. I really didn't understand it, but I was like, well, everybody says this is the thing to do, so I'll try it. That trial and error process of figuring all this stuff out. Threw my hat in the ring, heard back the next day, I got the deal. Went ahead with it. It was a lot of money up front. So in terms of budget spending, that was really kind of a leap, but everybody said it's worth it. I just, a leap of faith, went for it. And in August of 2021, I put it up for a 3-day free promo. Should have done more days in retrospect, but again, I didn't know what I was so green. I didn't know what I was doing. put it up for 3 days. Right away, the first day, it went up to the top 100. It was #1 Kindle free book. And over the course of the 3 days, it got 28,000 downloads.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And that
huge.
That basically pushed the book out in a way that I could have never imagined and never figured out how to do otherwise. So I would hands down say that was the best money I spent. And I would certainly recommend it to any other writers if they've not tried it, because it was a game changer for this book, for sure. And for me as a writer.
Did you reap any reviews from all of those downloads?
Absolutely. I got the Amazon and the Goodreads reviews. The bulk of them from that. Well, the majority of them from that. And in fact, they still trickle in. And that was over a year ago now. They're still trickling in. I think I'm up to almost 1,600 Amazon ratings and reviews.
Wow.
Yeah. And I started out at about 16.
That's very impressive.
Yeah. And honestly, I view it a lot down to that Celtic storytelling luck I have. Or my grandfather, maybe he pulled a few strings. I don't know. But, a lot of it was a fluke and luck, as this business can be.
You're going to have a lot of writers reach out to you for a sprinkling of that dust.
And I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to share it.
Tell us a little bit about your second book.
My second book is titled Campbell's Boy. And it, as I said, is a historical fiction coming of age tale. It is set in the 1850s in a Northern California town called Colusa, California. Again, it is based on some genealogical family research I delved into, and it was sort of one of those finds that watch out what you look for. You may not want to find out what you look for, because it was like a bomb of information about this family line that I found out that no one had ever known. I found this out, and I felt compelled afterwards that I had to tell this boy's story, Emmett Campbell, because he was involved in a court case out in Colusa, California in the 1850s. And now I'm giving you the real life events. A court case that led to an injustice served to him. And so I felt that I had to, in a way, right a wrong by writing the story of Emmett Campbell. And it's a story about his life and the hardships he endured and what he ended up doing with those and how he ended up living his life.
So a lot more research.
Yes.
Does your family support your career as a writer?
They do. They've been really helpful in, first of all, I have my first reader is my long-suffering husband, who happens to be a former English major. So that's good. His editing chops are incredible. And I also have one of my sisters involved, another former English major. And then my kids, well, I should correct that. They're not readers, but what they are great at is all the technology that I can't handle. And they've been really great with supporting me that way. So yes, definitely support.
Do you ever have writer's block? Do you believe in writer's block? And if so, how do you rid yourself of it if you have it?
I don't believe in writer's block. I do believe in procrastination. I don't, in general, get writer's block at all, but I will find myself procrastinating, and I just keep myself to task. I really do. A lot of times I'll sort of tease myself like, okay, if you sit here and write for a half hour, I'll give you a piece of chocolate at the end. The little rewards along the way help. And making sure every day I try to tend to something, whether it be the actual writing, but as you know, the business of writing is a huge chunk of our writing life. So that's also a part of that. And I don't necessarily distinguish between that time because we have to do both. We really do to keep it going.
Well, I have certainly found that the marketing of books takes us away from the writing of books.
Yep. But that said, a lot of that marketing is using our creative writing tools as well. So I kind of like to say, well, I'm writing too when I'm doing that.
Well, Mary, our last interview question on authors over 50, as always, our writers are such a unique group. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
I do have advice. First and foremost, I want to say, if I can do it, you can do it. And beyond that, I really think that if this is something you really, really, really want, as is all things in life, you will make it happen for yourself. And you will put in the time, the effort, and the energy to make it happen. Now, that said, you also, I think, have to roll up your sleeves now and get it going. Get it going and get it started.
Well, I think that's great advice for all of us today. We appreciate your being here and offering your expertise, and we look forward to your second book coming out November of 2022. And we now are happy to say you're one of our writers over 50.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm so happy to be a part of your production, and I really appreciate your support.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.